The desire to learn is one of the core tenets of the human experience, as is communicating the concepts we come to grasp. We want to understand and we want to be understood. We want to share our interests with people we care about. It's nice to be known as the expert on something, to have people care about what you think. Learning is frequently a social experience in this way. And I think this is a large part of the appeal of roguelikes, games where you're thrown into a procedurally generated world with little to no instruction for what specific items or even mechanics do. With games like these, the online community catalogs how everything in this abrasive world ticks. People share their experiences and theories and unravel the mysteries of the world together. A large part of the fun is gaining access to what feels like forbidden knowledge. What was so impenetrable to you before is now common sense. There's other games that share this too, say survival games for one. And even how the meta evolves in a fighting game is based around the development of new techniques and wisdom shared communally. I realized recently that most of my favorite games are solitary experiences that are deeply tied to attaining knowledge. These are games like The Witness, Outer Wilds, and Return of the Obra Dinn. Even games like Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring fit this category in moments. Games where the joy of exploration is not a prize at the end, but simply the act of discovery. You don't make progress by leveling up skills, you don't unlock new weapons or items over the course of the game, and there's not even a traditional level structure. The key behind the unique appeal of these games is that you progress by gaining knowledge. These are games where the point is to learn how to play them. This is where I have to give a slight spoiler warning. I'll be keeping things as light as I can, but what constitutes a spoiler in these games is incredibly subjective, and I am going to reveal the solution of a few early puzzles, as well as talking about early story events in Outer Wilds and Obra Dinn. These games are very easy to talk about if you don't mind ruining surprises, but I want you to be able to enjoy this whether you've played these games or not. Still, proceed with caution. In The Witness, your main method of interaction is through these simple-looking maze-like line puzzles. There's somewhat a vague story told through these long-winded audio diaries scattered around the island, but the meat of the game exists here. You make your way from the start to the end. Simple enough. The puzzles are all presented in these little panels in such a way you might wonder why this game is even in 3D. Occasionally you'll come to these sometimes literal progression gates that stop you in your tracks. Here you see a symbol you've never seen before, maybe multiple. You can brute force your way through some of these puzzles, but you will eventually be stumped if you don't know what these symbols mean. There are rules on how to solve the puzzle. But you were never taught what any of these meant. These dots are pretty straightforward. You just have to make sure you touch all of them in your path to the end. Okay, but what about this? And this panel is in a really odd shape and it seemingly doesn't have any indication on how to solve it. It doesn't even have any symbols. The game presents all this in an open world where puzzles are divided into somewhat linear sections, but you can leave a puzzle at any time to go try one elsewhere. So if you get stumped, you can always come back later. And you're meant to. Not just because a fresh pair of eyes is sometimes what you need, but because the solutions for some puzzles will teach you how to solve others. Outer Wilds is a game without a consistent puzzle system, but is cut from the same cloth as The Witness. It's a game about unraveling the mysteries of a new universe. You're learning about made-up physics and the intricacies of uncharted planets. You play as an astronaut, going into space for the first time. You learn about long-extinct alien civilizations, get a primer in your gear, and you head out. Where are you gonna go first? The terrifying Dark Bramble? What about this planet, Brittle Hollow? It's falling apart and it gets sucked into a black hole that exists where its core should be. It doesn't make much difference though. After you've been exploring for a bit, the sun in your solar system goes supernova. It destroys the planet you've lived on your entire life. It destroys everything you've ever known and everything you ever could know. But then, you wake up. The same place you woke up that morning. You're stuck in a time loop. At the end of the loop, which is only 22 minutes long, the sun always explodes. Everything resets at the start of the loop. You can't change anything to be different next time. The only thing that remains is your memory. Your character, and of course you, the player, remember everything that you've learned. You learned about the Hourglass Twins. You learned about the cyclones on Giant's Deep. You learned about how to get into... When you eventually beat the game, when you solve all the mysteries, you'll do it in just one 22-minute loop. The answers were there all along. You never get any new technology, You just learn how to use what you have. You learn how to navigate these planets, how the alien species the Nomai operated. You discover what the quantum moon is. Once you learn all this, once you see that it was right in front of you the whole time, there's nothing like it. Super Bunny Hop can explain the physics, Jacob Geller can explain the emotions, but there's no way anyone can really experience this game vicariously. It's one of the only games to have ever made me cry. Look, I cry pretty damn easily when art wants me to, but as much as I love games, it's not often they can get me emotional. But this game is magical. The Witness is a game that doesn't have a tutorial, at least not in the sense that there's never any on-screen text directly prompting you to do anything beyond just telling you what the controls are. It does have a tutorial in that it fairly obviously telegraphs where to find starter puzzles that ease you into certain mechanics. These are very cleverly laid out, as the first few puzzles might have multiple solutions, meaning different people might come to different conclusions on how the mechanics might work. You may have an inkling as to how you solve these puzzles, but you don't really have complete information to know for sure yet. But as you reach the end of these sections, you're forced to hone your understanding of these symbols if you want to move forward. Later puzzles force you to reevaluate your previous solutions, recontextualizing how you thought these rules worked. The sections are laid out so that there's no ambiguity by the time you finish. As you might imagine, systems like these need to be very deliberately built around the fact that, well, accidents happen. It's clear how it works in The Witness. The puzzles are too complicated to solve through guessing more than a handful of times. Not to mention the fact that this ruins the fun. But an occasional correct guess might get you thinking in the right ways. So this is right, but why? In Return of the Obra Dinn, you play as an insurance inspector solving the mystery of the titular ship that reappeared after being missing for 5 years. There were 60 people on board the ship when it vanished, and now there are none. So you're tasked with reconstructing what happened, determining the cause of death for everyone on board, or maybe if they survived. Luckily, you have a supernatural pocket watch that lets you rewind time and see a snapshot of some of these deaths, though your information will always be incomplete. You need to solve the deaths on the ship in pairs of 3 before the game gives anything up. Get 3 completely correct, and the game confirms your theories as true. The game has an incredibly thoughtful story with a ton of clues for every encounter, ensuring no 2 players will have the same experience. Obra Dinn does take you on a more linear path than the previous games mentioned, but you still have a huge amount of freedom in how you solve these mysteries. I'm trying very hard to talk about what makes these games special without ruining their secrets. I've completely avoided talking about multiple central mechanics in The Witness, and it is agonizing. Let me reveal just a little bit more though. While very open-ended, one of the first areas you're lightly pushed towards is this orchard, which will fully introduce you to the mindset you need to be in while playing this game. This panel is shaped like a tree, and there's no symbols or anything that existed previously to guide you. But eventually, you'll get the idea to look around you. Hey, there's an apple in this tree, and its branches look exactly like this puzzle. This little interaction is a microcosm of what really makes this game tick. Opening up a shortcut in a game is cool, but what's more impressive is when the developers pull off hiding one in plain sight. And that's pretty much the entire experience of playing this game. I won't reveal much more, but the way you're forced to reckon with everything in your environment in order to solve these puzzles is nothing short of brilliant. You end up spending a lot of the game staring at these flat panels, but the crux of the experience is everything in between. Whether that means looking at your surroundings for a clue or writing down puzzle solutions in a physical notebook. I love games that force me to break out the pen and paper. It's always a good time. Since I've been singing The Witness's praises though, I have to point out that some of these puzzles involve interacting with sound or color in a way that a hearing impaired or a colorblind person would just straight up not be able to solve. Solving every section in the game isn't mandatory if you want to reach the end, but there's still decent chunks of the game that will just be missed. Accessibility in games in both indie and big budget spaces has gotten pretty great in the last few years, but having absolutely 0 options for these players was unacceptable even in 2016. And for what it's worth, designer Jonathan Blow is by many accounts not a super pleasant guy. It's often said nowadays that it's harder to have experiences like this with the internet. A new game comes out and nearly all of its secrets are discovered in the first week, if not the first day. I remember when people were losing their heads over an extra hidden illusory wall found in Elden Ring a couple weeks or so after the game launched. But even then, it was only so well hidden because it was probably a glitch or maybe intended for the developers to use, and ultimately it didn't have any real use. While the dedication of players is really cool, unless the game is extremely niche or brand new, some of the excitement around it is gone. The age of playground whispers around hidden characters and Easter eggs is probably over, but I don't think it's really that big of a deal. Sure, you can still get things spoiled on social media or by friends in your real life, even when you're being very careful. But for a game like The Witness, it's very easy to just not engage. After all, you're solving these puzzles because you find it fun. If you ever stop having fun or you're stuck, you can absolutely look up a walkthrough. Yeah, people already tore apart the entire game while you were sleeping, but you've yet to explore it. And isn't that what matters? And besides, these games are designed in a way that even if you hear a couple things you didn't want to hear, there's always more for you to find out. And sometimes a little spoiling is the thing that makes you want to check something out in the first place. These games are great even if you have them spoiled or if you're replaying them. Their charm does rely a lot on novelty, which one could argue is a flaw, but they're executed so well it doesn't really matter. Genre is something I used to think about quite a bit. The original inspiration for this video was that I wanted to define what this category of game was and come up with a term for it. The Witness is definitely a puzzle game. It's an open world puzzle game, I suppose, with some influences from old school adventure games like Myst, but it's a puzzle game. Yet its appeal to me isn't exactly that of a typical puzzle game. And I feel this connection between it and Obra Dinn and Outer Wilds, which definitely are not just transparently puzzle games. When I think of puzzles, I think Portal, or Baba Is You. And game genres are weird in general. We define games by their method of interaction before anything else. To use Portal as an example again, it's a first-person puzzle game, but its comedic elements, the sci-fi setting, its themes, all of that is secondary. This just all seems so absurd now, trying to put these games into arbitrary boxes. Of course, coming up with a coherent definition is going to be nearly impossible to do. Despite it being a futile task though, I don't think it's completely ridiculous to think about. Maybe these games aren't the same genre exactly, but they do come from the same school of thought. They're philosophically similar. As restrictive as labels can be, they can often help us communicate complex thoughts to each other. We're distilling broad ideas into single words and phrases that instantly communicate the basic concepts. When someone says platformer, you might imagine Mario, or 2D Mario, or you could think as abstract and subversive as Ynglet. But because we have names for these things, we can come to the same conclusions and understandings more quickly. I know what a platformer is. I know what you're pitching me when you use that word.
Finally, we can compare this to Breath of the Wild's Climb Anywhere approach, which seems even less sensitive than Shadow of the Colossus. This looks like a spectrum, ranging from more context-sensitive to less context-sensitive rather than a hard distinction. Although I spent an hour...
Matthew Matosis might be the first person in many years to find a new and interesting way to talk about Breath of the Wild. In his video, Context Sensitivity, he attempts to define and examine the design term he's coined, that term being context sensitivity. The games I've been talking about are also all bereft of context sensitivity for the most part. It may not be a signifier of an entire genre, and it's absolutely not the sole connecting philosophy between these games, but it is one of them. In The Witness, you click on line puzzles to interact with them, and that's it. In Outer Wilds, you have the same toolkit for the entire duration of the game. There are a very limited amount of objects you can pick up temporarily, which even then is just relegated to a single button interaction. The FromSoft games can be largely defined in this way too, which is, I think, the main difference between them and other action games. It's often said when talking about these games that the main thing that changes over their course is your ability. These games do have weapons and armor defined and a level system, with Sekiro being the main exception here. But if you just improve your knowledge of the world, how enemies move and attack, and work on your dexterity, you can conquer these games. It's not exactly the same thing. You have to actively ignore many of the game's systems and put arbitrary restrictions on yourself to prove you can beat these games through skill alone, which people do of course. But especially in Elden Ring, there's a similar sense of freedom to a game like Outer Wilds. And there's a lot of riddles and secrets that scratch the same itch, like the cave that's completely hidden by an illusory wall, or the many extremely missable areas that take literal hours to beat. The fact that the game doesn't hold your hand in regards to well, anything, but specifically exploring its world is part of its appeal. It even plays a big trick with the size of its map. You've probably heard this before, even if you haven't played the game. You keep thinking it's almost filled up, and then it just gets bigger. Then there's the times when you're walking around Hyrule and Breath of the Wild, and you have to use diegetic markings to navigate, like formations of rock or literal signposts, as opposed to in-game UI telling you exactly where to go. In somewhat keeping with the theme, this was the first video that I was genuinely a little worried about making. I was stressed because I wanted to make sure I played as many games that fit into this nebulous pseudo-genre as possible. What would happen if I missed one? I was getting close to finishing writing just a few days before Taiji came out, but I had to at least try that game, right? I mean, it was directly inspired by The Witness. I mean, I know I miss games. Tunic has one of the most exciting puzzle conceits I've ever seen, with its made-up language and game manual you have to translate and piece together, but I didn't beat it. And there's so much room to play with this idea of a made-up language in a game. Jan Measley actually has a fantastic video on a collection of these. Ultimately though, I have respect for people who take the time to make YouTube videos like, I watched all 300 of X thing in a month and here's what I learned. But I don't think work has to be completely comprehensive to be meaningful. The quest for knowledge will span our entire lifetime. As people, we're forced to accept the fact that we'll never know everything about maybe even a single subject. Others will continue to discover new things long after we're gone. Sure, someone can dedicate themselves to a single field and maybe become a true expert, but how many other topics would they be neglecting because of it? This isn't just an ode to being a jack of all trades. There's just so many interesting things about this world to learn, so many books to read, so many games to play, so many hobbies and skills to pick up. I recently read The Master of Go, which is a great read because it's very short and very fast-paced. It's also fascinating because it's about someone who dedicated their whole life to being the master of a single game. I got really into abstract strategy games late last year. I'd mostly been playing chess and looking into a couple others, but I did recently play my first game of Go. Go is undeniably one of the most complex two-player games out there, and I am perfectly content being bad at it. I'm attracted to figures like the master in this book, Honobo Shusai, because I am nothing like them. I genuinely have immense respect for those who can dedicate themselves to a game like that and be so brilliant at it. And of course, there's certain skills I hope to master in my lifetime, but personally, for the most part, I would just rather experience more things. It's hard enough to find time to do all the things you love in this world. The scariest part about our limited time on Earth to me is that there will come a point where we stop developing new skills and learning new things. Games like The Witness and Outer Wilds quell that fear somewhat, fulfill that desire to understand the world around us, and offer something deeper in addition, a sense of finality. The world is increasingly filled with obtuse algorithms dictating various aspects of our life, and modern life in general is so frequently alienating and confusing. These games offer experiences with concrete endings, with concise and finite worlds you're meant to explore and decipher. And even if you don't solve every puzzle, you know it's within your reach. And it's a lot easier to decide when you're done and satisfied when you know something is finite, designed so that you can attain mastery over something. But of course, we'll always want more. Part of being a human being is always wanting something. When we have no desires or wants, we often get bored. We like to be doing things, we like to be productive, bettering ourselves, bettering others, or just learning for the sake of learning. When we're playing these games, they scratch an itch, the desire to learn about things. But they end. There's a somewhat disturbing existential quandary that pops up when you consider that there are programs made to play a lot of board games that can beat most or all humans. To return to Go, there's a program designed to play it called AlphaGo, and as you'll learn in the eponymous documentary, it has the ability to evaluate all its possible moves and then look something like 90 moves ahead to see the consequences of them, which is just so obviously beyond what a person could do, even given way more time. And professional players very often are on strict time limits and do not have that time. The program wasn't always as creative or thoughtful with its moves as a human could be, but in time, as a deep learning program, these skills could and did develop as well. Its development is undeniably interesting, but it's still kind of terrifying. And the fact that the existence of programs like it eventually caused professional players to retire is depressing, to say the least. I don't think it needs to be that way, though. The internet doesn't have to ruin our video game secrets, and AI doesn't have to ruin your favorite games. Human players have value because they're human beings. We are living sentient things, and we can still do things that AI can't replicate. And as easy it is to be cynical about the state of the world, humans in general are not the issue. Human beings can be really cool. We make art, meaningful art, designed for other humans, and that's all that matters. I really like the art that some of us have created, and I've met a lot of good people. Plus, I really like Mario. I'm glad people made Mario. A robot can beat us in Go because we designed it to. And anyway, why should we not analyze all the new ways the computer plays and work that into our own strategies to play against other real people? Games, as well as all art in a way, can provide us with condensed versions of broader emotions and experiences. The journey these games take us on are unlike anything else. They teach us and fulfill us and make us feel clever and ignite our sense of wonder. They eventually end, and we eventually learn all there is to learn about them. Not even these wonderful feelings can last forever. But that's okay. It's just a part of life. The Witness, Outer Wilds, Obra Dinn, games like these wouldn't work if they went on forever, and not every game is meant to be like them. And besides, eventually, someone will make another game inspired by these experiences, and then we'll have more to play.